Hi, Paddy. Thanks very much for taking the time to talk to me today. I very much appreciate it.
No problem.
And for those who don't know Paddy is known in Dublin in Agile community. He's an Agile coach in Ishaport, and also he's a blogger, and he blogs mainly on Scrum-related topics. Actually, any Agile-related topics, isn't it?
Yeah, Scrum tends to be the start-off point, but any agile-related topics are good. Yeah.
So again, thanks very much for taking the time to have the chat with me today. So, Paddy, a while ago, we had this very interesting conversation about how to approach people who are more reluctant, team members who are more reluctant, and there is a little bit of less buy-in on their side towards this new ways of working, agile ways of working. And we had quite different views on that. And for that reason, I thought it was very interesting, I was very interested in continuing this conversation and seeing how, because that we talked about it a while ago, and I guess probably both of us tried by now at different things and different approaches. But I thought because we at the time we represented a little bit different views, it was a nice starting point. So Paddy, do you want to give us a quick synopsis of how did you approach that at the time? And what did you choose, and what do you do now?
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that since talking about it, I've talked about it more with different people, and my thinking about this subject has certainly changed a lot since I encountered this issue for the first time. But it's an issue that I think anyone who works with teams will be familiar with. We're trying to get something done, some kind of change. Maybe it's introducing Scrum, maybe it's just making an experiment for the first time. And for some reason, somebody in the team, maybe even more than one person, is not really into the idea, not behind it. And, possibly even, actively doing things to make sure the thing doesn't work. And how do you cope in that situation as the change agent? That was the kind of the theme. And I think in the past, certainly in the beginning of my career as a Scrum Master, I fell into a trap, I think, of focusing all my energy on the resistant areas. So if a team of 8 people, for example, had one person, the person who was resistant, I think I tended to focus my energies on convincing them, oh, how can we get this person to change their mind? And what am I perhaps not doing right? And could we reframe the problem or explain it in a different way? And I think when we talked, we kind of talked around the subject of, well, isn't it also good to focus on the people who are positive about the change? And shouldn't we be bringing them along? And perhaps the person who's resistant will see the positive impact of the change and catch up then after the fact and become convinced. So I think it's 2 different approaches possible. And I think the first approach that I described can be quite exhausting, particularly if somebody is quite resistant to change. So I think my thinking on it has evolved a bit more towards the second approach, which is build evidence of why this is the right thing to do in practice. Get alignment through building a coalition of people who are interested in experimenting and seeing what the results will be, and eventually you'll have a compelling data set.
Lovely. And that, to be honest with you, the first time we met, that was my way of going. Probably because I'm lazy, but I kind of thought, I will focus on those who believe, into believers. And then, the other people will follow once they see it working. And I remember there was this, and I think I probably, shaped my mind about it because I remember once there was this girl, she was a developer, and she said the moment somebody asked her to test, she will give her resignation. I was like, okay, she's too good, we cannot lose her, leave her alone. And by the, it's even not months later, it's a couple of sprints later, she was testing. And, she was left alone, and I was like, okay, just leave people alone and they will follow if they want to, if they see the value of it, if the others can prove it. And that was a big eye-opener for me. And I have few other examples of how that concept worked. Do you have any examples how you managed to convert non-believers into believers?
I probably have more stories of failure than success, to be honest. But I think I've learned from every kind of interaction like this. I think certainly, an unwillingness or a difficulty in seeing the value of even things like the Scrum framework. That's something I've encountered, and someone in a team who might even be, relatively senior in an organization or in the team itself. Perhaps not really seeing, well, what's in it for me, kind of thing, where the kind of culture change that's needed is kind of what's in it for the team, like how can we all help each other. And sometimes, when you're in a good situation, you do have to give up a little bit to join a team, and you have to sacrifice a few things, in the interest of everybody doing well.
Yeah.
So it's not always an easy change to make to start using a framework like Scrum, for example.
Yeah, of course.
But I think the main thing I've learned from the attempts to resolve these kind of problems is the self-management piece, the not investing too much emotional effort, not investing too much energy into thinking about the problem, worrying about the problem, taking it away, and maybe taking it home. If people are really, really resistant to something happening, perhaps they will be, perhaps they will be resistant. Perhaps that resistance will carry off, and maybe they'll end up moving to a team that isn't doing the thing that they're resisting. That's a possible outcome, and it doesn't mean a kind of a personal defeat for a Scrum Master. You don't represent the framework. You're there to try and make sure it works for the team, and sometimes that might mean somebody saying it's not for me, and that's okay. And I think when I encountered those things earlier on in my career, I probably would have beaten myself up about it as a failure, as a failure of the Scrum Master role. But I think I've developed my own thoughts on that, and part of the conversation with yourself would have influenced that you can't always make change happen. You can plant the seeds, you can influence things, you can coach, but if someone really doesn't want it to happen, that's another possible outcome.
Yeah. And Paddy, just one question, for those who are more junior Scrum Masters, do you have any advice to give about how much to invest, how much time to give somebody before we decide, okay, too much is too much? Like, what's I know there's a very fine line there, but
Yeah.
what would be the cutoff point? I give up.
I think the key word for me, and the word that comes up again and again, and I've moved into a coach role a bit recently, so I'm talking to teams and talking to Scrum Masters about the role more than being in it hands-on these days. But I think the key word for me on this is expectations. I would strongly encourage, if you're starting out as a Scrum Master in a new team agreements right from the start. Discuss expectations of what the team needs from you and what you need from them, what kind of Scrum Master they want, and what kind of Scrum Master you think you can be. Because you may need to adapt very early, and you could go through a few sprints of pain and a few difficult retrospectives. It might not be clear what those expectations are until you have some trickier conversations. But having that up front in a team agreement, discussing expectations, I think if I could go back to that situation that I'm thinking of now, it might have changed things. It might have, made the situation more transparent earlier, and then we could have done something about it earlier. Maybe I could have done something differently on advice from the people who were resistant to change. We could just have had a clearer conversation.
Yeah. Very interesting, Paddy, because again, I'm representing here a little bit different view.
Okay.
So very, very, that's why I enjoy working with you and, talking with you, or like working in the community sense, but, talking with you, because very often, like, we complement each other's viewpoints. I definitely agree about team norms. I think contracting really is a solid basis. But I also believe that Scrum Master, especially with the teams which are immature and sometimes never work that way, it's like customer. If we ask customer, what do you want? They will be like, I don't know.
Mm.
So it's a little bit like I'm more, autocratic is a bad term, it's a pejorative term, but I would be more rigid in terms of Scrum upfront, because I believe in informed decisions. So I believe people cannot make up decisions until they are informed. So in the beginning, I would be more rigid. I would expect people to learn and be informed before they make decision. This is not for me. So that's why in the beginning I'm more autocratic. This is what it is. This is how we follow. But then as we go with few sprints, I would ask for opinions and
Mm.
I would relax. But I think in the beginning, if we ask the teams too early, especially immature teams, especially people who are very comfortable in old ways of working, who are well settled in the organization, what do you want? They definitely either they don't want to change or they don't know what they can, how it can be better, how it can be different. So I think contracting is definitely something what I do and I'm very fond of. But sometimes I think asking people too early, they might just not know. Do you want to comment on it? Any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, and there's an idea I've been thinking about a lot. We in where I work now, we work in the SAFe framework, and sometimes there's just an idea or a concept that sticks in your mind. And there's this idea of solution intent, and it, like most things in SAFe, I'm sure it originates somewhere else, but the idea, one part of solution intent is that you start off with a combination of a fixed idea of what the solution is and a variable component of that. So in a complex environment, the variable part is big and the fixed part should be relatively small when you start out, because obviously it's a complex, VUCA environment, so you got to figure it out as you go, learn and adapt. And I think the same principle can apply when you come into a new team. You will always have conversations with stakeholders to the team before you go in. You will always have an idea of the context of the team before you enter. Like for example, the other side of this conversation is a high performing team. I think a really good question for a Scrum Master is, imagine a team where everything's working well. There's a good engineering culture, strong engagement with the product owner. All the metrics indicate that it's a high-performing team. You've just started work as a Scrum Master in that team. What do you do? What's your role in that position? And I think a team agreement in that position is really important, because it's light touch, it's observation, it's coaching, it's facilitation. Whereas if you come into an immature team, it's a completely different role, like you say. And I think the intent needs to be more instructional, teaching. There are different stances needed. And perhaps I think what some junior Scrum Masters aren't taught always is that to be a Scrum Master is to be adaptable to the situation that you're coming into. To think that you can be the same kind of or take the same stance with every team, I think that's probably flawed. Like you can't always be a coach, because a junior or intermediate team who are relatively new to an Agile framework, they need more than that. They need someone to be more like a teacher.
Yeah. I agree with you, Paddy, 100%. And even, it's maturity of the teams that matters, but also makeup of the teams. Two different teams are made of two different, people. And very often I would work in parallel. I would have multiple teams at the same time, two teams at the same time. And I would do different things with one team and with the other team, because they made, differently, like the different things, different techniques works better with one team. So I think what you mentioned here about this, plasticity of the role of as a Scrum Master, it's very important, because I think that the important and crucial part of being Scrum Master is this ability to figure out what's working with one team, what's working with the other team.
Yeah, I think so. And it's fun. I think one thing I learned early on when I started working with more than one team was trying the same experiment or the same process change in the two teams at the same time and seeing different results. How much more information do you need? It's like one team loves it, the other team hates it. Okay, this is a good data set, so yeah, every team is different. And I think that, Barry Overham calls it the stances. I think Gunter Verheyen calls it as well, the stances of the Scrum Master, the kind of default role that you're expected to play in a particular context. I really like that idea, because in order to develop in the role, career progression as a Scrum Master probably means getting better at those stances that you're not as comfortable in. Like look at those 4 stances that Gunter Verheyen has, or the 8 that Barry has, and ask yourself, am I good at all of those? Like, can I do more to develop myself in any of these? Personally, I found Barry's paper really, really strong. So that's one I'd recommend to any Scrum Master out there.
Okay, Paddy, so before we finish, maybe we could, a word of advice or sentence of advice to a junior Scrum Master, and having in mind those, the statement, the initial statement we started with. How do you deal with a team that not all team members are on board with the change and what's happening, these new ways of working?
I think my kind of piece of advice in one sentence would be prepare to be adaptable. And there's ways to do that, but I think there are stances of a Scrum Master. The stance that you use the most in your last team may not be the one that you use the most in this team. That's maybe how I'd sum it up. Well, what do you think yourself?
I guess, to me, the most important thing is being open-minded. And, just remembering that Agile is about people. Sometimes, in Agile, we are meant to value people over processes, but sometimes we just lose that bit and it's like break or, but fit into our process. So I just think being open-minded and sensitive on needs of others, because if we in tune into other people and leave them alone, either they will buy in or we will find out and figure out this is not for them, and then it means like breaking somebody, forcing them to fit our process. This is to me not exactly an Agile way of being.
Yeah, I think that sounds a bit prescriptive, right? Which is the kind of code red word for a Scrum Master. We don't like being, if we're described as prescriptive, right?
Yeah.